Happy Sunday, everyone, and welcome to the next teaching of the Buddhist Recovery Network Academy. I'm Robin Smith. I am joining you from New Orleans, Louisiana, and I know it's Sunday for most. It's Monday morning for some. Today we're going to have a teaching from Angyu Devin Ashwood, who will be speaking about the practice of freedom. So thank you for being a part of our Sangha today. Before we bring the teacher on, if I could just introduce him briefly. Angyu Devin Ashwood has been influenced by a range of traditions, but is primarily trained in the Soto Zen tradition in the lineage of Shunryu Suzuki after meeting Tenshin Reb Anderson Roshi in 2000. For much of his life, he's worked to make the Buddha's liberative teaching and practice available to the underserved populations in prisons and addiction recovery services. As part of this, he works as a prison chaplain and trains teachers to deliver mindfulness-based relapse prevention. He received a master's degree in mindfulness-based approaches from the University of Bangor and is currently working as the Director of Gaia House, which is an insight-focused Buddhist retreat center in the UK. He occasionally writes for online and print publications, including Buddhism Addiction for the Sage publication Key Concepts in Substance Misuse. So, yes, without further ado, thank you for joining us. Devin, I need to sort this out here, sorry. So now we can see, perfect. Sorry, things are not going smoothly behind the curtain today. Welcome. We're so happy to have you here. I'm going to give the floor to you now.
So, well, may I just say thank you to Robin and everyone at the Buddhist Recovery Network for setting this up, this amazing series of talks up. I'm really appreciating that, all the efforts that are behind the scenes and the love and generosity that people have just putting out there to support recovery from addictions in the Buddhist context. And also very grateful to be invited. I feel quite humbled by the range of speakers that have been invited to talk on this series of talks at the Buddhist Recovery Network Academy. And thank you all for joining me. I've noticed a few friends have logged on this evening, so thank you guys, and thank you everyone who I've met and who I haven't met before. So I think I was invited by Robin then to start with the talk. So for the next quarter of an hour, which is fairly brief, I was going to offer these few words entitled "The Practice of Freedom." I did consider calling it "Getting Over Yourself," but I thought the practice of freedom might be a little bit more attractive. And there will be a chance to have some questions at the end. So please do stay for the brief meditation and engage in the conversation. Some people come up with some fascinating questions, and I always feel these things are so much more alive when I have an opportunity to respond to what people bring up rather than just offering a pre-prepared talk. So I thought after we've had, I think, about 5 different speakers so far in this Buddhist Recovery Network Academy, and I thought it'd be a good punctuation to summarize where we have been to date. So talking through some of the highlights for me of the speakers who've gone before. And as I did that, I wanted to draw together some of the threads of mindfulness, Buddhist practice, what's termed spiritual awakening in the 12-step traditions, and recovery. So Vimala opened this series of talks with an offering entitled "Why Buddhist Recovery?" And I really appreciated her quoting Dr. Bob in Spiritual Milestones, where he says, consider the 8-part program laid down by Buddhism. And he highlights the 8-fold path and suggests that this could literally be adopted by AA as a substitute for the 12 steps. And he adds to that that generosity universal love and the welfare of others rather than consideration of self are basic to Buddhism. So this is the parallel that Dr. Gwab highlights. And Vimalasara drew out parallels between the Four Noble Truths of Buddhism and the Eightfold Path and the 12-step recovery movements as exemplified by Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous and all the other wonderful mutual aid groups that support people in their recovery. And after Vimalasara, we had Vince Cullen come on, and Vince spoke about befriending Mara. Mara being the Lord of Illusion, or the tempter or tester in Buddhist mythology, and encouraged us to not see anger, hatred, greed, delusion as problems, not see the hindrances of agitation and sloth, of attraction, aversion and doubt, not to see these things as a bad thing, but to see them as an opportunity to befriend Mara, to befriend these defilements and hindrances, so that rather than seeing them as obstacles to the path, to see them as the path, to with mindfulness and kindness to turn towards these challenges, and as we turn towards them, they become the path themselves. After Vince, Tueri Sala offered a talk entitled "Seeing the Impulse Pass," so related to befriending Mara, where we might want to get away from difficulty. If we turn towards it, if we study it, we have an opportunity to give up the destructive behaviours that impulses maybe would habitually draw us towards, and we can feel into a neutral. Through the practice of meditation, we can, in our meditation, notice the subtlest attraction and aversion arising, and in meditation we can just observe the passing sensations of attraction and aversion without reacting. And in giving up the destructive behaviours that might come from the subtle attractions of an aversion, it's like, for example, feeling like you've had enough of the sitting practice, even though you'd only been sitting for 5 minutes, but you're committed to half an hour. If you just carry on sitting at that point, you're practicing just being still, feeling into neutral with those urges, and that can then move into everyday life. Murray Stankovic talked about letting go of the second arrow. Again, rather than compounding problems when we face difficulty, not trying to get away from them. She highlighted that the root of our suffering comes from changing how we relate to our pain and dissatisfaction. But there's inevitably, being sensitive beings, we're inevitably going to experience sensation. We're inevitably going to feel discomfort at times. We may feel physical pain at times. But our reaction to grasp at the pleasant and to resist discomfort is what drives addiction. And these behaviours that reinforce avoiding discomfort, grasping after pleasure, are the consequence of not being able to let go of this second arrow, not being able to let go of doing something to get rid of the pain. And Mary Stankovic encouraged us to turn towards and experience discomfort. So I felt there's a real theme in this addiction series of embracing the difficult, of turning towards the difficult, of at least tolerating the difficult long enough to study its nature, to stay present with it long enough to learn from it. Ralph Steele, the final speaker that we had prior to this one, came full circle and again highlighted the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path as a formula for awakening. And interestingly, what Ralph brought up was of interest to me, was how the Buddhist path itself can create new opportunities for craving. He offered a warning about the power of concentration and how the highs that blossom in meditation can themselves be addictive, how we can maybe transfer our addiction from destructive substances or behaviors or foods to the meditation practice itself. From the states of concentration that arise in meditation, we can create hindrances to the path through attaching to these. And I was very interested in that. So in the same way, in a 12-step recovery program, some people transfer their addiction from a drink or drug or other destructive behavior to the 12-step program itself, and become quite obsessed about their recovery and very attached to the forms of the 12-step recovery program. This can happen in versions of this can happen in Buddhism, in Buddhist practice. And I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. Usually when people give up drink or drugs and attach to a 12-step fellowship, it's a better addiction in the short term. In the long term, maybe it also creates undermining behaviors, unsociable behaviors, which could sabotage recovery. But maybe it's a helpful thing in the long term. And maybe getting addicted to the highs of meditation or getting addicted to states of concentration, maybe it's not a bad thing in the short term in Buddhist practice, if it helps us to let go of some of our other addictions and obsessions. For me, in some ways, the Buddhist path is an opportunity to attach to something which has no purpose but to help us to get over our attachments. So far we've been looking largely at Buddhist practice as a training in a new kind of relationship to difficulty, one that allows us to be free of the harmful effects of discomfort and dissatisfaction. But to be completely free of the craving that causes us so much suffering, we must address its root cause. The Buddha's teaching offers us a clear and well-researched framework to understand how craving arises. When the Buddha laid out in many of his talks the 12 links of dependent origination, he highlighted what states of mind cause and what states of life leads to other states. In this, he highlighted that it's attraction to sensations or aversion to sensations that leads to craving, which in turn eventually leads to all the suffering of life. But at the root of the 12 links of dependent origination, the cause that causes all the other causes which end in all the suffering of life, there is ignorance. The Buddha highlighted right at the base, ignorance. Not understanding how suffering arises, not understanding the path of freedom, not understanding the nature of reality or who we are, is the root of all our difficulty, it's proposed. And the Buddha exhorts us to dig up the root of craving, pointing out that we might practice skillfully with difficulty, but like a pernicious weed, and unless we dig it up by the root, it'll come back. So how do we cut the root off? Well, as we saw in the 12 links of dependent origination, if the root of the causal chain of existence is ignorance, the solution that he offers may be fairly obvious. It's wisdom. Wisdom is the cure for ignorance. And the Buddhist path is, in many ways, a training in wisdom, and a training in the kind of wisdom that uproots the ignorance that is the cause of all addiction and suffering. And one of the most profound understandings that we can open to through this path is the truth of who we are or who we're not. And the Eightfold Path that's been spoken of so much already in this series directs us away from trying to necessarily know who we are. If you look at the Eightfold Path, it's not asking us to look at who we are, and it's not really a self-improvement program. Instead, I think it suggests us we pay attention, as the speakers who've come before me have done, to pay attention to the greed and the hatred and the confusion that motivates the building of our self-identity in the first place. As we come to understand the nature of Mara, of the Lord of Illusion, if you like, as we come to understand the nature of the defilements, the greed and hatred and delusion that cause the pain that we experience, we can begin to see their temporary and dependent nature. As we see how our experience of difficulty arises dependent on conditions and passes away, we can also see how our idea of ourselves is also created in a dependent manner, is temporary and passes away. And we can take the ideas that we have of ourselves as a result less seriously. The kind of wisdom that uproots craving isn't so much an intellectual knowing, although it includes this. It's more the kind of wisdom that requires practice, so that our life is lived differently as a result of our knowing, as a result of the wisdom that develops. And no one can really tell you how to ride a bike. You have to get on and practice. The wisdom that's free of self-clinging and self-ideas comes as a result of not of obsessively chasing pleasure or avoiding pain, but instead by studying pleasure and studying pain, and studying the ideas of ourself that arise in their midst. As we renounce letting go of and avoiding difficulty, of obsessively grasping after pleasure, of being this, of not being that, mindfulness practice can deepen and permeate our life. And we can really begin to pay attention and learn. As we learn the limits of our selfish views and selfish craving, we can learn to hold them more lightly. And our selfishness can begin to drop away. This dropping away of selfishness might be called, in a 12-step program, spiritual awakening. The kind of spiritual awakening that facilitates helping others to walk the path through the example that's been realized through this practice. As Dr. Bob pointed out, generosity, universal love, and welfare of others, rather than considerations of self, are basic to both Buddhism and the 12-step program. Working for the welfare of others is what well people do. This is living recovery. So this may have stirred up all kinds of ideas, and there will be an opportunity for some questions after we've had a short opportunity to sit and digest. But maybe we could all collectively just stop for a moment now and tune into whatever this has stirred up, whatever's going on for us right now. And let it go. Just see if we can let go. Coming back to the breath in the body. Feeling in to the moment by moment sensations of breathing. Just allowing whatever's here to be here. Not trying to change anything. Simply tuning in to this moment by moment movement of the breath. So I understand there's a system for putting your hand up, which Robin can respond to allow people to speak live, or I think you can also type in your questions in the chat box. I'm very happy to respond to whatever is offered.
I actually have a question for you to kick it off. There are, I really, I love the concept of being able to cut off the root of addiction with wisdom and our perceptions. But so often those perceptions, it come as glimpses. It seems like the wisdom sometimes just doesn't stick. It's only momentary, and it helps us to get over that hump for a while, and then we kind of forget about it. So in your experience, what are some of the best ways to actually to internalize those perceptions in like a long-term way, in a way that actually takes us not only past our addictions, but that much closer to enlightenment?
I'm not sure about enlightenment, as in getting close to enlightenment, but I think for me, there's kind of two ways of talking about this. And one is as practice, that through the practice of ethical discipline, of meditation, over time, there's a subtle but growing confidence in practice that emerges. And as Ralph Steele said, you've got to put in the hours. I think there's no shortcuts to a sustained, stable, confident recovery or a stable, confident Buddhist practice. And I think one of the things that for me is key in developing a life that puts in the hours is devotion. That we need to be devoted to this practice. And what is the key to devotion? For me, I think it's different for different people. Some people have got to hit rock bottom and know there's no other option for them than to completely turn their life over to a recovery program or completely turn their life over to a Buddhist practice. Some people become devoted to a wise and compassionate teacher, and that inspires them to practice. Some people reach an existential crisis and find their devotion there. But I think somehow we need to be inspired to turn our life over to practice, to give it the momentum that it needs for us to put in the hours. Because unless we really are committed, unless we really have had enough of the life that we've had on some level, I don't think people tend to want to go and do the kind of strange things that are required to get recovery and to establish a Buddhist practice. I mean, not many people want to go away and spend 7 days meditating or go to a 12-step meeting, you know, not 90 meetings in 90 days to establish their first practice and then keep that going for years. They're pretty extreme things compared to most people on the planet. It's kind of against the stream to be doing this stuff. So I don't know a way unless something clicks which gets us to really commit. Joanna. So it says here, so as a Buddhist, I've been wondering how to think about the turning over one's will to a higher power baked into the 12 steps. My meditation is helping me to uncover my Buddha nature. Also, my meditation helps me to become more awake and conscious of making good causes and not making bad causes. But my Buddha nature is inside me, as the Buddha nature is in all things and throughout the universe. Is there a higher power, a divine aspect to uncovering my Buddha nature? So I don't quite know who I am to answer this question, but I have a view which I'm happy to share, Joanne, which is it's my understanding. I think there's two ways of answering this. One is I think the Buddhist tradition doesn't teach that there's a higher power, as in a kind of like a God creator that's kind of higher than the creation. But I think the concept of of giving up oneself to something greater than us is completely incongruent with Buddhist practice, because the nature of reality from the Buddhist perspective, from people who study Buddhism deeply, they realize that the nature of reality is completely interdependent, and so totally interdependent to the point that there isn't actually any separate self from the universe, that each individual is a creation of the universe and totally and utterly dependent on the universe. The problem with suffering and addiction comes from thinking that we're something in addition, that we're somehow more important than the rest of the universe, that we need to, or we're less important than the rest of the universe, that we're somehow separate. And I think my understanding of really deep addiction is when we're in that state, when people are in that state, they're very self-obsessed. The sense of separation is very deep, and chasing after drink or drugs, addictive behaviors, are trying to feed a self or obliterate a self. And we kind of need to get over that self idea, and I think handing over one's will to a higher power is a way of getting over yourself. It's a way of giving up on your agenda, on your life, on your happiness, and making yourself available to the world that gives you your life. If you wanted a Buddhist equivalent, it could be giving yourself over to Dharma practice, giving yourself over to devotion to Dharma, giving yourself over to the welfare of others, to the welfare of all beings. So in my talk, I was encouraging people to get over themselves, to engage in a practice that helps them take themselves less seriously. This is trying to do the same thing that handing your life and your will over to a higher power is trying to do, to make yourself available to the welfare of others. I don't know if that quite answers your question, Joanne, but there's some thoughts that I've been having on this particular step in the 12-step program and its relationship to Buddhism.
Devin, much gratitude to you. Thank you so much for your thoughtful teaching. I actually really love the reminders of the teachings that we've had in the past that have brought us here to have an opportunity to hear you today. I'm feeling a lot of gratitude right now. And generosity is the most natural outward expression of an inward attitude of compassion and loving kindness. And it's through generosity and the act of giving that a lot of love and abundance come back to us. So I want to invite you again, our participants, to show your support of the teacher today and of the Buddhist Recovery Network program. Your donations will go to help us continue meetings. Also, some of the dana will go to the teacher. And once again, there's the link that will take you back to the Buddhist Recovery Network Academy page. And if you just indicate that it's for Academy when you make your contribution, that'd be very helpful. I do also want to just make a little, to let you know about something that Devin is involved in. He's leading the Gaia House, which is Europe's leading non-sectarian Dharma center. It's been growing over the last 35 years, and they now have more people wanting to come on the silent retreats than they have space for. And so they're now doing a fundraising effort. And so this is an appeal. If you would like to help them meet those demands, you can visit their website, and then if that appeals to you, here is a link to go to for that. They are taking contributions. So I wanted to end by just letting you know that next month on the first Sunday of August, Dr. Stephen Tierney will be speaking. We'd love to see you there. So thank you all for being here. Thank you for the generous gift of your presence and your attention, and have a wonderful week. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Robin.